Welcome to episode 12 of the Kindness Objective podcast. I'm Melissa Marquais. I'm the founder and executive director of TKO. Joining me today, I'm very excited to have you here, is Scott Mulligan. He is a psychotherapist and a mobile crisis response clinician, and he has assessed hundreds of kids, homicidal and suicidal youth. And we were talking about this and the relationship to bullying with that. And despite what many people would like people to believe, that there is no correlation, there absolutely is. And Scott's going to talk to us about that today. Thank you so much for jumping on here and joining.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's a topic that's, I see happening in real time every day with kids that are either, victims of being bullied in a lot of different ways, or the actual child or student is, the perpetrator or person who's doing the bullying. And so a lot of the impact that I see are with kids ages from 6 to 18. I get called on the scene for different mental health crises situations. So an example would be like a kid is suicidal, at school, maybe made some suicidal statements. And so I'll get called in to sit down with the kid, assess him or her for safety and risk, and do some brief therapy to figure out what's the next best step for their care and for their support. And so what I see a lot of kids who do self-harming or what we call suicidal ideation, where they're thinking about suicide or having these intrusive thoughts that they've maybe never had before because they're really young. But it's a lot of it correlates to them telling me they're victims of being bullied by other kids, and it impacts them. So it impacts their mental health in a very negative way. And so, as kids, we are still developing our brains. Even when we're, 16, 17 years old, our brains are still developing. And also we're developing our sense of self, who we are as a person. A lot of that, comes down to as humans, we're not meant to be isolated. So we're always searching for connections, right? And so kids that are searching for connection or trying to fit in, who get bullied, it's a huge blow to their ego, and they're just developing their sense of self, their ego, right? Of what they are, what they mean to the world, trying to define themselves, right? And the only way they know how to do that is how they operate in the world. And when they get bullied, because they're so young, right, they tend to internalize those hurtful actions by somebody else. And, many cases it could be, someone making fun of another student in a way that's humiliating and, makes that student feel like it's too much to face their friends again, or their fellow students again, because they've been shamed in some way. And so I see a lot of that happening. And so the kids that are really acute for suicidal ideation, or sometimes they'll do self-harming, where they cut themselves or they'll hurt themselves. Bullying really has a direct impact on that, right? And so unfortunately, the school system doesn't really have training in terms of empathy training, kids in terms of, that skill. And then also I think, schools sort of lack the foresight to implement things like assertiveness training for other kids that might be shy or timid and don't know how to deal with more assertive kids or more dominant kids. So I see it a lot in the schools, and then I also see it a lot in the ERs, where a kid shows up and they've already attempted. And again, it comes down to their self-esteem being destroyed, being humiliated and shamed in a public way. And it destroys lives. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and something that I want to bring to the forefront And so I'm glad you invited me.
Now, I'm so glad that you're here. I feel like your expertise in this can really shed some light on the misconceptions that there are, because a lot of times, just a week or so ago, I interviewed a father whose 10-year-old son had taken his own life because of
Oof.
bullying. And it
Yeah.
was definitely 100% clear that that was the reason. But
Yeah.
even when it was investigated, they
Hmm.
refused to say this was because he was being bullied, because he didn't
Right.
even know. So
Yeah.
there's this misconception that, like, well, yes,
Mhm.
but maybe they're dealing with things. They were probably abused at home, but a lot of the time they come from great homes with loving families, and it's just a matter of the bullying at school. And it just seems to be completely dismissed by law enforcement and by people who investigate these things. And I don't understand why that is.
Yeah, I think yeah, I don't know why that is either, right? I think it's a matter of like assuming liability for what happens. Every school has a policy or should have a policy around uh, bullying behavior, right? They
Mhm.
should. And so I would encourage anyone that, listens in or is a parent or whatever, that you really look into your school's policies, right? Do they have something defined around this, right? Because there's certain behaviors that, some schools have a zero tolerance policy on this, because it does create such a negative impact, not only for the victims of, who's being bullied, but the kids that are doing the bullying, right, have a false sense of security and power when they, successfully bully other kids too. So
Can you
it's
talk
bad
about that?
for both kids. Yeah, because what research really shows and what I've seen is for kids that are really bullies, um, you are really have underlying mental health issues or challenges. It's different for every kid. Sometimes it's the bullying happens at home, where
Hmm.
they're abused at home, and so they just sort of take it out on uh, anyone they can, right?
Yeah.
Um, just like they're getting it taken out on them. Sometimes it's a complete lack of confidence and security in themselves, and it's an overcompensation for that lack of confidence, where they feel like, by putting someone else down, I elevate myself in status. Sometimes it's
Right.
to like make someone feel excluded from a group, to let them know you're not part of this group. And so to take a behavior in such a way to let them know, like, hey, you're excluded.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I think about the people doing the bullying, I really think about the underlying mental health of those individuals. And what it tells me is, many cases, they have a low self-esteem, they're insecure, um, and in many cases, the parenting at home kind of enables these behaviors, or as the behaviors modeled, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes there's domestic violence in the home, and it's modeled that way. Sometimes there's abuse in the home, and it's modeled that way, right? Sometimes it's just, it could be emotional or abuse as well, and that gets modeled a certain way, right? Um, so it's never like, what I see from a kid who's between 6 and 18 that's doing bullying. It's a learned behavior, and it's not instinctual. It's not like you grow up hardwired to bully somebody else, right? It's a shaped, learned response behavior to something else going on in your life, right? That's just not right.
What would you
So,
say about the kids that are bullying because they want to fit in with the cool kids? Like, do you find
yeah,
that those kids always have a bad situation at home that they're learning from? Or do you find that maybe there are some kids that maybe come from good families, but they're
yeah,
not feeling confident in school because they're not friends with certain people? What
yeah. I
could you
think
say
the
about that?
dynamics can be a lot of different ways. I don't think it's always the parents, but I also see it the other way around, where sometimes the parents are really laissez-faire, and they let their kids, there just aren't a lot of boundaries, so their kids are able to kind of, they feel entitled, so they're able to do what they want, and sort of at home, and when they apply that to the real world, and they don't get their way, and they don't know how to any other way to kind of use their words or use influence to get what they want, they result to bullying sometimes, right? And it's not really because it's been modeled by the parents, but maybe, you know it just certain behaviors haven't been reinforced at home or just overlooked, right? In terms of boundaries and what kids can get away with, right? Because kids, they have a tendency, how it is. Kids have a tendency to try to see what they can get away with, especially, new kids. And it's just in their nature, I think. I don't know. But I think it's for the kids that are doing the bullying, I feel like there's ways to kind of intervene effectively to stop the behavior. So when I get into a situation at a school where someone's being bullied, what I really try to do is create a safety plan between myself, the victim, the perpetrator, and both sets of parents. And it's a process, right? First, what I tell the victims is that we have to kind of document what's going on and kind of understand what is actually happening, right? I understand and identify the situations that it's happening. And then secondly, kind of make aware, school staff and parents of what's going on and create sort of like a safety plan in terms of, when two students might interact, putting more monitoring on those situations in between, periods, things like that, creating safe spaces for kids to go to when they feel threatened by a bully, having all that kind of stuff outlined in a plan can be very helpful. And, it's not about blaming. It's about coming to an understanding between the relationship between two kids and how it needs to be healthier, right? And so without trying to create too much, you don't want to create too much, you don't want to make sure that the parents of the person that's doing the bullying or the kid that's doing the bullying, you don't want to make them feel totally defensive, like you're pointing the finger at them so much. But I think it's a good way to model problem solving in terms of saying, hey, when you do these behaviors, this is how it makes me feel. And we want it to stop. And we want to look for ways we can work together to make it stop. The other thing that I think is key in this is that, at the school is to have a sit down between the victim and the perpetrator, mediated by a school counselor or someone like myself, right? Where there can be a kind of prompted interaction between the victim and between the perpetrator. So there's an understanding of how what the perpetrator is doing impacts that victim, right? And there's an understanding. And so there's a lot of ways to intervene, right? But I feel like, when we talk about the bullies and the victims, they both have underlying kind of challenges, right, that they're dealing with.
That's an interesting point, because it is definitely not just the victim that's dealing with the challenges. Clearly, if somebody is bullying someone else, they're not feeling very confident about themselves, or they're going through something themselves. Because like you and I talked about when we chatted yesterday, people who have true, genuine self-confidence don't want to tear other people down. So there's definitely something going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. They want to connect with other people. They want to have a healthy connection and develop good relationships. Usually the majority of the kids out there that you're out there, right, are good kids, just wanting to make friends and, be good friends. But there are those kids that, and a lot of it's what I see is a lot of it's a trauma related response to something happening at the home, unfortunately.
It's sad.
Yeah, it is, right?
Sad.
It's like a feeling of powerlessness or, feeling of recreating situations that you see at home, right? The dominating, the putting down, the demeaning, shaming, humiliating. Most of the time, bullies have experienced that themselves, right? And they're putting it on somebody else because it's all they know.
I think that, when a lot of schools talk about the fact that they have a zero tolerance policy for bullying, but the majority of the time, nothing is ever done until, unfortunately, it escalates to where a child has reached a point where they're feeling either suicidal or homicidal or having suicidal or homicidal ideation, and they call you in.
That's right.
And interestingly enough, and I know you and I talked about this with TKO and our workshops, every person and every organization that we've reached out to that we want to work with has been so incredibly receptive and excited about what we're doing, because they also want to see these improvements. The only people that don't respond are the schools. And that is something that it needs to be talked about. Why is this, right? Like, why are the schools only stepping up and intervening when someone like you is called in because a child is talking about taking their own life?
Yeah. It comes down to lack of training within the school. It comes down to lack of policy and a clear understanding across staff that there is this policy. And there's sometimes it's a resistance to having to own up. Sometimes the schools feel like, hey, that's a parent's job. That's not my job. Right. But at the same time, as a parent, I feel like it is the school's responsibility to create a safe environment. And if there isn't, that safety being created, then we need to review what the policies are, and they need to be changed. Right. And there needs to be also an enforcement policy with some kind of restorative justice for the bullier. Right. We can't just punitively, kick them out of school. Right. They need counseling. They need mental health help. But there should be some restorative justice they can also do to earn back their privileges, integrating back into the student body, right? Because without that, you're just negatively reinforcing behaviors for someone who does bullying, and they may not learn that, hey, there's another way to do this.
That's an interesting concept. You just kind of sparked a thought when you talk about integrating back into the community with school by doing things that are good and positive and showing an improvement in behavior.
Yeah.
When we talk about some of the kids that start bullying other kids because they want to fit in, if we take away the fact that they can't fit in behaving this way, the only way to fit in is going to be to have good behavior and treat people respectfully. We're changing the narrative there.
Yeah, I think so too. I think instead of looking at it like it's power play, it's about how can you effectively get along with people using your words, your communication, your influence, without demeaning or hurting someone else, without having to purposely put someone down, without having to shame somebody, right? How can you fit in without having to do those things, right? Because ultimately, we're all trying to get connected. We're all trying to find connections.
Yeah.
We all want to feel like people get us and like us, right? And that's just a normal human want and need. And so they're going about it a different way because they've never been modeled the right behavior. And I shouldn't say right behavior, but healthier behaviors of, ways of getting what you want without bullying, And so they're just recycling what they know.
Something you said that I want to share something with you. And you talk about how it's important to sit down with the bullier, the victim, and both parents. I agree with you 10,000% on that. When I was growing up, if there was a situation with another kid in school, both parents were called to the school. We met with the principal and what have you. Today's day and age, with my own experiences in schools, a couple of years ago when my son was really little, he had a couple of kids who were giving him a hard time at recess. Now, my son is a very strong kid, strong-minded. And he said, Mom, he was like 6. And he said, Mom, I don't mind fighting back. But when there's like 3 of them, and there's just one of me, it's kind of like Mr. Miyagi, 1-to-1. Yes. 5-to-1. Too much. Ask anyone. When he says that in the movie.
Yeah.
But when you go to the school, they refuse to tell you who the other child is or who the other parent is. So they're not giving you the tools to mediate it. So I wound up going on Facebook, and we have like a traditional parents of such and such school.
Yeah, right.
And I said, if your son is so-and-so in this grade, please reach out to me. And somebody did. And we chatted, and the kid's dad had left. He had been deployed. We're in a military town. He was struggling since then. And the mother was so nice. And her and I just chat. I said, look, I'm not coming to say like, your child's a bad kid. My kid isn't perfect either. I'm just wanting to come to you so we can figure out how to find a resolution between our kids so that they go to school and it's healthy for both of them. And we had a great conversation, and she talked to her son, and after that they wound up playing soccer together at recess, and that was the end of it.
Yeah, it's
you don't even
crazy.
give you the opportunity to talk to the other parent anymore.
Yeah.
And it's really causing a lot of problems. So many things can be handled through a simple conversation, but they don't allow it to happen.
You know, again, it could be because some parents are volatile. Some parents are defensive and will just, they're, you know, they've had the experience of working with that particular set of parents or parent, and it's been resistance nonstop, right? And they've had other complaints about their kid, and their parents they're either in denial, or they don't want to believe, right? Or they believe what their kid's telling them. So I think I see that sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Where it's not my son, you know, that's not my kid, right? That's the other person's full of it. Like, it's them. And you get some of that sometimes. So sometimes schools are a little reluctant to put everyone in the same room, because it could get, you know, if it's not mediated right, it could get heated and get ugly. But that's where it comes back to schools taking some ownership over this, right? Where there's like training it within the school on how to run a successful, you know, intervention, right? And where everyone signs a safety plan, right? Where everyone agrees, this is how we're going to keep your son safe or daughter safe, and here's we're going to keep, you know, both parties safe, right? And here's how we're going to do it, right? And we agree to do these behaviors. We agree to not do this. We agree to that, whatever those things are that we outline in the behavior and safety plan, and everyone signs off on it.
What if they don't abide by it? So we're all agreeing to this. Now, say the bully agrees to this, everybody agrees to this, and then they go and they continue the same behavior. Is there a consequence that's in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there needs to be enforcement of policies that are fair and restorative, and restorative, meaning it's kind of like, you know, if you take your kid's phone away, right, because they did something wrong, or they lose a privilege because they did something that broke a rule or whatever, right? I always say give them an opportunity to earn it back too, right? Because they're more than likely that's a thing they want to get back. You know, they'll actually invest their time and energy into those behaviors to earn it back. But if you don't give them that opportunity, then they don't see a different path, a corrective path. So I feel like, you know, absolutely there needs to be an enforcement, and everyone needs to be like on the same page and aligned in terms of is the policy, in terms of if someone's bullying another kid, like what is the punishment? What is the consequence for that? And a lot of schools don't have that really outlined at all. Or some schools don't have a policy at all, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that you're right. That's a good point. I mean, it needs to be agreed upon. Like, hey, if this happens again, like what's the school going to do to intervene, right? And then the school staff has to sign off on that. So I think that's a good point.
You and I talked yesterday about, you know, like when you say like some parents are volatile and like, oh, it's not my kid, right?
Yeah.
That is so true. And I think some parents of the children that are being bullied can be very aggressive because they're angry. I think that this is where you and I talked yesterday about the workshops that you and I are going to be putting together for parents, where how to communicate with your own child about, if they might be being a bully. Like, we don't want to, parents need to understand that doesn't mean their child is bad. That means their child is struggling with something. And so it's not a matter of you're bad, you're this. It's why are you feeling this way? Are you feeling like you don't fit in at school? Like, what are you trying to gain from this? Because when we come from a place of empathy in any situation, people are going to be more willing to open up and share. And when the parents of the kids that are being bullied come to a parent of a bully and they say, look, I know that no kids are perfect. Like my son, my daughter, they're not perfect either. I'm not trying to say your child is bad. I just want to talk about how can we work together to improve the relationship between our kids. And when you handle it from a non-aggressive approach, people are always going to be more willing to listen. But when you come at somebody, the first thing is defense.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. It's like, if you go to somebody and the first words out of your mouth are, I'm wondering if you can help me with something, they're more likely to drop their guard a little bit, because it's like, all right, what do you need help with? And, and so they
Yeah.
want to know, versus, hey, your son or daughter is doing this to my son or daughter.
Right.
And those are the first words out of your mouth. I mean, how would you feel? I mean, just human myself, I would be on the defensive, right? If someone came at me without, right, coming at me with like context. But we're humans, right? So, if someone were to like do something to my daughter, it's, easy for me to say to other people, like, do as I say, not as I do. But I would be pretty freaking angry too. Yeah, I would be pretty upset, right? And my first instinct would be to step in and protect her. But the best way to, I think, handle it is kind of how we mentioned, right, where we model the behavior that we want from both of them, right?
Yes.
We model some assertiveness that we want from our kids to stand up to bullies, and then we want some, empathy from bullies to understand the impact their behavior has on other kids, right, and how it feels, right? Because it doesn't feel good to get bullied, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I agree with you 100%.
You mentioned the self-harming. I think it's important too that people and kids understand that, when they're in a classroom, we'll take a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old, for example, and they're picking on someone because maybe they want to fit in with the crowd, or they're dealing with the bystander effect, where if they were alone and the kid that gets picked on dropped all their stuff, they would probably help them pick it up. But, oh, those kids are around, I can't show them that I'm being nice to that person.
Yeah.
I think it's important, and that's the exclusion also that you talked about.
Yeah, right.
I think it's important that people understand, like, it might be just a moment for you, but it lingers for the person that's on the receiving end of that treatment. And it does lead to self-harm, and it leads to eating disorders, and it leads to drugs, and it leads to all kinds of unhealthy things. What have you seen a pattern of with bullying leading to certain behaviors? Is it usually the self-harm, drugs?
Yeah, I usually see a lot of self-harming. Kids that will find any object they can to cut themselves on their arms or their legs, and not deep enough to where they would really do damage, but enough to where they draw blood, right? And so,
Why do they do that?
Because they feel so low about themselves. Many times they feel so either numb or depressed in an acute way, where they just, for them, it's like, for some kids, it's a release. For some kids, it's like punishment. For some kids, it's to feel something besides what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And it becomes a coping mechanism for them, because they've never had to deal with something like this before, right? And so a lot of times what I see are some kids that like have these self-harming thoughts or intrusive suicidal thoughts they've never had before. It's startling for them. A 12-year-old, 13-year-old, to have these things going in their head, like they're not used to it. They're not like, what? They want to shut it out, but they can't. I see a lot of that happening because of the bullying that goes on. They feel helpless. They feel hopeless. They feel a sense of despair about their environment because the bullying is happening on a persistent, pervasive basis.
You said yesterday, when I was telling you about a friend of mine who lost her daughter, and I shared with you that she had gone through something humiliating at school.
Yeah.
And in all of the time that I've been doing this, one thing that you said, I never even really thought, and it was such a plainly obvious thing. And you said, a lot of them, it's like, how am I supposed to go back to school tomorrow after this?
Yeah.
And that's what the suicidal ideation comes from. It's like an escape from having to go back in front of those people that they were humiliated in front of.
Yeah. Sometimes it's like severe anxiety. Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to face these kids? And I've been just shamed or humiliated in such a way that it demeans me as a person. And there's other people laughing at me, pointing the finger at me. How do I wake up the next day and face those same people at school?
It would be hard for us to do that as adults.
It'd be hard for anybody, right?
Let alone for a child that's not fully developed.
Right. And doesn't have, kids have a short-term time frame in terms of how they think. They don't think long-term about some of the consequences of their actions. They just sort of behave, right? And they're learning they're learning about themselves as they're in the world. But they don't think long term, right? So they think, oh my God, my life's over. I'm never gonna, how am I ever gonna be able to go back to school again? How am I ever gonna face these people again that have humiliated me and put me on social media in like a humiliating light where the whole world can see and I'm exposed for something that is, for whatever. And that's awful. That's absolutely horrific and awful for somebody to have to face the next day.
And social media is no joke either. And people
Yeah,
alter things. Like I saw there was a Steve Wilkos episode. This girl,
yeah,
she was a cheerleader and she was a flyer. So she was like the one that they put up on the top.
yeah,
These girls had like photoshopped a photo of her in the air and
yeah.
like made it look like she was defecating.
Oh,
And
geez.
they posted it on social media.
Yeah,
And she had gone through like these suicidal ideations,
yeah,
and her mother took her out of school because she was like, I can't do this.
yeah,
She stopped cheering, which she had spent so many years doing. It was like the love that she had was her passion.
yeah.
And eventually she said she just had to get back to who she was. But for years, the
Yep.
impact of that, and it wasn't even something that was true. It was a photoshopped picture made
Right,
to humiliate her.
right.
And
And
it's
sometimes
horrible.
it's not just the image itself. It's the realization that there's someone in the world out there that would do that to me, and just having that feeling like, why me?
Yeah.
Why? Right? Because you're young and you don't understand it, right? We understand it as adults because we've had way more life experience and we have a lot better sense of ourselves, because we're older. But
Right.
when you're 13, 14, 15, you're just thinking half past your nose,
Yeah.
right? That's it. You're like, where am I going to go play next? Who am I going to go hang out with? Like, your friends are uber important, right? Your connectivity is super important at that age. And when you get bullied and you get humiliated like that, and you get excluded like that in such a humiliating way, the impact is, like you said, could last for years.
Yeah. Some people it lasts through their entire adult life.
Entire life. Yeah. It takes them in their entire life to get that confidence to the point where they can like not need something external to make themselves feel better. It's terrible, but I see the repercussions of it. And, it's, that's why I think like there needs to be more interventions. There needs to be
Yeah.
more awareness and, parents and, I feel like schools need to step up and take this seriously. I'm not sure why school, administration would look at this and shy away from it, other than it would have to be that they have to admit that there is a problem
Right.
that exists, right? Maybe they don't want to admit that there really is this problem that exists, because it would mean having to somehow admit to, maybe your fear is other people would get wind that it goes on at your school, and so they wouldn't want their kid to go to your school. I don't really
Everybody
know
knows
the
what's going
logic,
on anyway.
right? Yeah, right. But I don't know the logic behind not wanting to implement something that's really meant to keep kids, both the kids being bullied and the kids that are doing the bullying, safe.
That would draw me to a school as a parent, because I
Yes,
know as a parent that no matter what school you go to, there's going to be bullying because
right.
kids see this. It's
Yeah,
just what happens, and it's not a
yeah,
secret. Everybody knows
right.
this. So if I'm looking at a school and
Yeah,
I see like, hey, this school has implemented these workshops for empathy building activities where kids see different perspectives and have a day where they're able to walk in someone else's shoes and
yeah,
understand their differences and bridge those gaps. I'm going to be drawn to that school because I know the bullying is happening in every school, but I
yeah.
don't know what every school is doing about it. But I
That's
do
right.
know what that school is doing about it.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And then on the flip side of that, I think there are workshops where, assertiveness training, both for people that want to, learn more effective ways to get what they need, what want out of life.
Mhm.
And also for kids that might be a little bit more timid, that are afraid of bullies or dealing with bullying, how to assert yourself in that situation to stop it from happening, right? So I think there's ways, a couple ways, right? Empathy training is so key because it makes the other person feel what the other person's going through, which I think is like that realization, like, wow, I didn't realize how that feels for the other person. I think
Yeah.
that's really highly impactful, right? I think that's so important. And I think it's one of those things at a young age that just doesn't get taught enough. So I think those workshops are uber important. And I would be attracted to a school that, had a policy, had empathy training, right? Had assertiveness training, right? I would be attracted to that school because
I would
I
too.
feel like they're trying to shape my kid in a really healthy, positive way, not just throwing academics at them. Right? I feel like that, to me, I'd be like a green flag for me.
And they do have like guidance in some schools where it
Yeah,
focuses on things. But the difference between that and the workshops that we're doing are like that's presented in an academic nature as
yeah,
opposed to an activity where they're actually interactive
that's
with each
right.
other and understanding what other people are going through. It's one thing to say, empathy is this. It's another
You
thing to give
throw
them
it
an
up on a
opportunity to
chalkboard
feel
or a
that.
screen that says, "Here's what empathy means,"
Right.
and then asking the audience, "What do you think it means?" I mean, that's
It doesn't
really
help.
not effective. It doesn't, because those kids aren't going to pay attention. But if you put them into a role play scenario where they have to be on the other side, right?
Yes,
They're
100%.
if you're doing it, like, that's way more impactful. And I think those workshops. So I think they're really important, and it's just a matter of getting more buy-in from I think the right folks at the school level. Um, I really feel like the people at the front lines get this. Your school social workers, your school counselors, the people that call me into SAS or
Yeah.
excuse me, assessments. Um, they get it. I collaborate with them all the time. Like, they're on the front line, seeing it, feeling it, and I feel like we just need more of those folks to raise their hand a little bit and say, yeah, it'd be great to implement some of these workshops at our school. And these kinds of workshops, what the research shows, when you do empathy kind of training and things like that,
Mhm.
it shows like a reduction in those bullying behaviors, right?
Mhm.
But it also shows an improvement in those students' overall academics too, right?
Nobody can focus on school when they're sitting in a classroom
Yeah,
anxious about what's going to happen when they're walking to their next class.
right. 100%. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the workshops are so important for the kids to really feel and experience what that's like. Yeah, I think it's so important. And I think on the other side of it is kids need to learn how to communicate and be assertive in a healthy way. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to get us, to want something, or to feel wronged, or to feel whatever. But there's ways to communicate to get what you want, using your words, using communication, right?
Yeah.
Versus bullying, right? So I think it's a skill learning exercise for kids that um, you really can understand. Like, hey, there's another way to
Yeah.
get what I need. And so it's just teaching those skills to these kids, I think, is super important. And
Yeah.
it's not taught. It's just not taught in school. It's just
It's not taught anywhere. And that's one
that's
of the
right.
things that I've seen. Like I've looked at other anti-bullying things and I'm like,
Yeah,
hey, but I
I did
haven't found
too.
anything that's doing what we do.
No, I haven't found anything that's implemented at all, really. It's
No.
just sort of like, hey, we could do a workshop if you want, or reach out to us and we'll put something together. But there's no, it's all, I did some research. I was just trying to find, there's, kind of little niche places here and there that you have kind of a bullying, psychoeducation, things like that. But
Mhm.
yeah, no one is doing workshops like this. Nobody's taking this on, right? Front
Yeah.
and center, and trying to do something about it. And empathy is a skill, right? Empathy is it's a major skill in life, right? It's the difference between getting along with people and, not getting along with people. And when you don't get along with people in life, right, your life tends to take curves and, doesn't go the direction you typically want it to. It's important to be able to take other people's perspectives, right? Understand how they feel and, right. And have that skill to be able to make the other person feel understood. And not everybody has that, right? So I think it's super important that schools really look hard at this. And I feel like they have nothing to lose by implementing something like this, right?
They really don't.
Skills-based workshop for kids that, it's an important life skill. So,
well, in the meantime, while we're trying to figure out how to get the schools to respond to us, I've found other avenues to work with the same kids through Parks and Rec programs and other programs. So we're doing that. And maybe once we can bring that data to the school to say, look, we worked with, I think we're going to work with 600 kids in July.
Wow.
And this is what the impact was.
Absolutely.
Right. And if they still don't want to respond, or if they still are not interested in improving things, then we have a bigger question to ask.
Mm-hmm. I think it's just getting the right people to look at this. And I think it's one of those organic ground level things that you just have to grow awareness around. People know it exists. Everyone knows bullying happens. We've all been bullied.
Everybody knows.
Yeah, most of us have been victims of being a bully at one point or another in our life.
Yeah.
Right. In some way or another. Many of us anyway. Right. So we all know it exists, but no one's stepping up to the plate to do something about it. No one's trying to create these types of skill-based workshops for kids that could last them a lifetime, right? And I think it's super important, right? Like you said, if I understood my daughter's school was implementing a program like this or doing workshops like this, I'd want to enroll her, right? I would think positively of that school. Like, wow, they're thinking more big picture than just beyond math and science or beyond, you know what I'm saying? Like they're thinking more about my daughter, like they actually care. They're thinking about this thing, absolutely 100%. Yeah.
There's the academic, there's the emotional, there's everything. One of the other things that I just wanted to touch on real quick, because you talked about this with me yesterday, where when a lot of kids are timid and shy and they're scared to stand up for themselves, they don't necessarily even have to fight. But if they know how to defend themselves, if you enroll your child in some sort of like boxing or karate, it gives them the confidence to say, I know how to defend myself. I'm not scared. So they have a different air of confidence that they put out that says to the bully, like, nah, that kid's probably not going to take this crap from us, because the persona that they put out. Right. So yes, it's really important. Like, enroll your kids in something like that where self-defense, they know they can defend themselves. That doesn't mean you're encouraging them to go out and fight all the time. You're just giving them the mental wherewithal to know that if they need to, they can. And that changes their complete demeanor and it makes them less of a target.
They're more relaxed, confident, empowered. Like, hey, I know what to do if something like this situation arises because I've seen it before. I've practiced it before. So if it happens, not a big deal, right? So it's, but for kids that have never experienced it and someone's physically trying to bully them or something, right? Like it's traumatic because you feel helpless because you don't know what to do. So I would encourage kids that, any kid, right, to take up like jujitsu or a martial art, right? The self-defense class here or there, right? Like it's empowering because it teaches your kids self-control and confidence. It teaches them awareness. It teaches them discipline and respect. And the fact is, when you learn a martial art, it's very humbling because you have to go with someone that usually is more experienced than you and knows what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a humbling in that sense, but it's also like a bonding with people that you respect, and there's sort of this teacher-student relationship that happens, and you learn. It's almost like a mentorship. You learn how to carry yourself, and so someone who's out to bully somebody, they're experts at profiling the right victims. They're usually the shy kids in the corner keeping to themselves, right?
Yeah.
That's the kid I'm going to go up to and say, hey, where's your lunch money? Right? What are they going to do? They're all by themselves, right? They're alone. They don't talk to anybody. They seem timid when the teacher calls on them. I notice those behaviors as a bully, right? But let's say you're a kid that just has a little bit more confidence about yourself from a, awareness perspective, right? And you carry yourself just a little differently, right? Because you learn that it's not about what other people think. It's about what you think and what you know and how you feel about yourself, right? And you learn that in martial arts, right? Because you learn a lot about yourself when you go through learning new techniques and drills and things like that. And you learn to control your fight or flight. You learn to control your emotions a little bit. So I think it's very healthy for any kid to learn a martial art or self-defense. Absolutely, 100%.
And for the kids that might be thinking about bullying someone else, if they're in a martial arts class, they're going to remember there's always somebody bigger and better than me at this.
That's why I said it's the most humbling thing in the world. When I got into martial arts and boxing, I had done martial arts for a while, and I thought I was pretty bad. And it was my sophomore year in college. I got with this guy, and we sparred, and he just made me look foolish, and he beat me up pretty good. And that's when I was like, man, I guess I'm not the king of this shit. I think really, I was ready to quit, but it actually taught me some humility, right? It taught me that it's not about comparing yourself to somebody or being better than somebody else. It's like you trying to better yourself. And so that's what martial arts teaches you, right? That's what I like about it. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and talking about this and your experience with the kids in the schools. I'm so glad that you were able to get on here and shoot down the notion that there's no relationship between bullying and suicide and homicide, because we know that that's just not true.
I see it daily. I mean, I literally see it almost daily. Yeah.
And you say you have about 5 to 6 cases a day that you're called to, right?
Yeah, sometimes 5 or 6 cases of people that are suicidal or homicidal. Sometimes I see kids that are being bullied that they call me in because a kid brought a gun to school.
Really?
I see the other way around, where it bounces back at them in a really bad way, where the kid who's being bullied can come back homicidal, right? And then they have to be hospital. They have to be kind of given some care because they're obviously not in a good place.
Yeah.
So, it's just, I see it so many different ways, but yeah, there's a direct correlation. There really is. These kids are so young, they're getting bullied, even the teenagers, their brains are developing. They're not used, they don't know what to do. No one's ever taught them what to do. And so it has a huge impact on their mental health. Well,
I am really excited about building out some more workshops with you.
Yeah, me too.
It's going to be great. And I appreciate your insight and your expertise and just the conversation.
Yeah, me
so
too.
Hopefully whoever's watching will take some of this and keep it in their back pocket. And remember, if your kid is bullying someone, there are ways to handle it. The natural response is to get defensive, but the impact that we have, that we can show them that there's a better way, is going to be better for them in the long run as well. It's not just about the kid that's being bullied. There's clearly something that your child's feeling too, and that needs to be addressed. So if somebody comes to you with that, take it as an opportunity instead of a fight. It's an opportunity for you to help your child as well.
Absolutely. It's you nailed it 100%. If your child's the one doing the bullying, right, it's a symptom of something else going on with that child that needs to be addressed, right? And we just need to figure out what that is, right?
Yeah.
And it can be resolved. So no need to get defensive about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for everybody watching.
You.
Be kind, be empathetic to each other. It's going to make
please be good to each other. And it was great to see you, Melissa. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. I hope you'll come on again.
I will.